When it comes to Rings of Power, one can't help but feel bias is in the air.
I smell it in the air.
Whether it be favourable or unfavourable. This video is an attempt to cut through the noise and lay things to bare as they really are, because I believe viewers owe it to themselves to understand what they are watching and why they are watching it. If there's one thing you know about Rings of Power, whether or not you've even seen the show, is that there are people in this show of various different skin tones. So let's not waste any time and jump into this hot topic. Imagine in your head your favourite movie or series from when you were a child. Now imagine the entire cast was race swapped. You could even imagine the same thing for all TV shows and movies you've seen too. For many of us out there, we would probably be lying to ourselves if we said that that would not change our relationship with those shows or movies at all. As a child, seeing someone of your complexion or culture on screen can provide a sense of belonging in the world and is symbolic of being recognised and accepted by the society as a whole. For aspiring actors, it's a figure of inspiration that if they can do it, then so can I. Some of us had an abundance of this when we were young, others not so much. Before we go any further, no. This video won't be harping on about the importance of representation, because this idea is flawed too. Nor will it be pandering to any audience, whether it be majority or minority. But I wanted to preface this video with that for the sake of bringing up something that some may understand more than others. Anyway, on with the video. Ismael Cruz Cordova, who plays Arondir in Rings of Power, being of Afro-Latino descent, was one of such people who didn't feel represented on screen as a child. But his story was not one of race alone. It was about escaping the clutches of poverty and judgment. This was never someone who plays the victim for their skin colour, acknowledging that dark skin can form a helpful or unhelpful bias, but someone looking for a fair shot like anyone else. He did not want to represent just a skin complexion, but be a symbol of inspiration for all those who, in his own words, felt marginalised and silenced, and who wouldn't jump at the opportunity for the role of a lifetime. Yet no one would know this. Most of his story has gone unrepresented, unknown, and all conversation that defends this show, whether it be from Amazon or the media supporting them, is literally one of black and white. The reason for this is the same reason many other demographics of the world go unrepresented in this show, including those of Eastern descent, because this idea of representation in Hollywood is only about what's popular in social identity politics today. So this idea of representation needs to be considered with a certain level of maturity. That's because if an adult lacks the ability to relate to someone unless they have the same skin pigmentation as them, that is far more indicative that they lack empathy and themselves are racist. How wise or cultured will you be if you can't look past skin colour? And for children, they should not be brainwashed with an idea of racial bias either. They should be free to have role models regardless of skin colour, gender, sexual orientation, or any other discriminatory factor. Free to draw inspiration from any direction they choose. They will not just treat people more equally, but they themselves will be more well-rounded and have more depth too. It's for this reason we should consider some degree of care when screaming from the rooftops about skin colour. Lord of the Rings. It seems of late something about this story has been forgotten despite being ever so obvious. It was a story of a little guy, or a few little guys, who were overlooked and seen of little worth. Yet they were the most pivotal in taking down the ultimate evil. It was a story of a fellowship made up of an elf, a dwarf, humans, hobbits, and a wizard. The message of diversity was there, in a sincere form, without feeling the need to make any reference to modern day issues or shout about it. Cordova's story was of escaping the clutches of poverty and prejudice. It was to represent all those who felt isolated, marginalised, or not accepted. His story is one of inspiration. Tolkien's message is one of deep meaning. Unfortunately, this TV series, The Rings of Power, is uninspired. It has nothing to do with Tolkien, nor does it have anything to do with bringing people together and ending discrimination, as much as Amazon claim it to, but in fact everything to the contrary. But first let's rewind. There's no doubt about it. Regardless of whether you like Rings of Power or don't, one thing both sides can agree on: this show has been polarizing. There's plenty of great content out there discussing criticism of the show, so I will only offer a brief overview here of some of those points for the sake of foundation, but instead look at just why this show is so divisive. Was it a coincidence, or is there anything else? And how the success or failure of Rings of Power can influence Western entertainment in the years to come. The sides of the critics state that the series is not faithful to the source material and the message of Tolkien. It's poorly written and generally just boring. There's also disapproval of the use of allegory. First, let's define allegory. A story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. Many statements came from Tolkien of his disapproval of the use of allegory. He wanted his work to be timeless as opposed to a pop culture sensation. In an interview running up to the release of the show, the showrunners issued the statement, It was very important that what he was creating was not an allegory. Every single choice we've made at every turn of making the show has been to be faithful to that aspiration. Let's see, shall we? Episode 4 shows a scene in which a reference is made to elves immigrating to the island of Numenor and taking the trades of the people. The man instigating this being Pharazôn, who is depicted as a populist. What gave rise to the fear of elves taking jobs was Galadriel washing up on their shores, so to speak, and not wanting to do anything but return to the mainland ever since. So given the context, this was absolutely nonsensical and a disingenuous depiction of what caused the divide in Numenor. Unfortunately though, this should come as no surprise. The showrunners themselves told us that the factionalization and subsequent downfall of Numenor should serve as an important lesson for the world we live in today. The very first episode depicts Arondir as the victim of racism, being told, "When are you people gonna let the past go?" accompanied with racial slurs too. This is a rather clear reference to slavery, with the white man wanting the black man to let go of the past transgressions, and referring to elves as you people as opposed to elves, such that the audience don't know whether the racism is against black people or elves. At this point, we've seen enough to know that it's pretty clear we've been lied to. The use of allegory is in fact rather brazen, and is even something that runs through the show in more subtle and subliminal ways. Galadriel, the lead of the show, is immediately shown as fierce and highly capable in combat. A stark contrast to those in her company, who one would expect to be war veterans to be out on such an expedition, who are weak, serving only the purpose of pins to be knocked over by a troll. A one-off action scene at the start of the show, sure, why not? But they will make a sustained effort to showcase her martial prowess, showing her escaping prison by effortlessly shepherding 4 heavily armed Númenórean guards into a cell and escaping in an air of smugness, and by schooling Númenóreans with patronizing lessons of sticking them with the pointy end of the sword, in a scene which only serves the purpose of establishing something of very little relevance that could have been dealt with off screen. The Númenóreans, by the way, are supposed to be a cut above your average human. And it's for reasons like this the show was so sluggish, whereby in episode 5 finished in the same place episode 4 did, with them setting off from Numenor, albeit under different circumstances. As for Galadriel's character, she's aggressive, authoritative and demanding, and talks down to all those she interacts with. She boasts multiple accolades which other characters make a point of echoing too, with Isildur dubbing her the Scourge of the Orcs. In summary, it would seem they've just handpicked generically strong traits and assigned them to Galadriel, making her a one-dimensional lone hero on a stubborn warpath of revenge against Sauron. There's no real thought, depth or nuance in the character which would be found in Tolkien, and quite frankly, to be expected from an elf thousands of years old. Galadriel, for example, is one of the strongest wielders of magic in Middle-earth, and so great potential was there to explore her incredible strength in other ways. Instead of telling some kind of compelling story for Galadriel, first and foremost they wanted to establish just how remarkable she is, and almost all her scenes primarily serve the purpose of reminding the audience of that. Then the show was just built secondarily around it. A similar blueprint is used for Bronwyn. Like Galadriel not being believed about the rise of Sauron, Bronwyn's voice was drowned out by men too, so she could prove them wrong and become an established authority figure herself, and be the voice to rally the villagers in defense of the tower. For the sake of a relevant comparison of a high-budget fantasy drama, Game of Thrones had many strong female characters, though absolutely nothing like what we see in Rings of Power. They had a vast range of strengths: wisdom, intelligence, courage, leadership, political skill, social intelligence, the ability to command respect and authority, ambition, great combat skills, you name it. They even knew how to leverage their femininity from time to time to get what they wanted, and some had a darker side too. Contrary to this show, which feels much more like a box-ticking exercise given by corporate, that's all but forgotten of the story it was supposed to tell. It would seem in the name of female empowerment, many of the characters are dull, unrelatable, and synthetic. Rather ironic, really. And really, much of the criticism can be deduced from similar reasons. By playing within these certain guidelines, everything feels so fake and dead, as if the show were written by an AI. And when that happens, ultimately, viewers just don't even care about where the show will go. But hey, we get some boxes checked on a spreadsheet somewhere, and we certainly get allegory, so let's explore how much that's worth. Having powerful, admirable, beautiful characters represent the correct political ideals in our world, and weak characters representing the other side as caricatures, has been used since the invention of propaganda. But were we ever surprised to see social political rhetoric in this show? From the very first press release, the 3 main words used to describe the show by the showrunners were epic, diverse, and filled with heart, while also comparing their ability to that of Tolkien himself. stating they had the ambition to write the novel Tolkien never wrote. The same idea of diversity is echoed in a PR attempt by Amazon, which featured influencers who are supposed Tolkien superfans getting early access sneak peek. But it was incredibly apparent that they were picked because of the minorities they represent, with Amazon giving them talking points on equality, diversity, and powerful women on screen. It would seem in the eyes of Amazon, if you are a minority, you are only allowed to talk about the topic of being a minority and nothing else. There was no real talk of the show or their love for it. In fact, in the run-up, there was rarely any talk of the show at all, because in all promotion, this idea of diversity and the need to represent the world we live in today was all they wanted us to know. And if I were to cover all such instances, this would be an hour-long video of only that. And surprise, surprise, the exact same topic rises to the surface once the show airs too. So both inside and outside the show, attempts were made to turn the world of Tolkien into something fitting a certain social political aesthetic. And it's also apparent, even to the many of us like myself, who make a point of staying out of all conversations pertaining to politics. Yet here it is, preying upon us all, whether we wanted it to or not, in an attempt to draw us into a culture war we never wanted to be a part of. And did that narrative certainly take off in the media? From this, the question arises, why embed the TV series with allegory and political messaging? And why lie about it, especially if it's so obvious? Well, the media backlash defending the show is rather telling, in which a one-size-fits-all narrative was created that stated all criticism just boils down to racism. Still little talk of the show itself to be found here. The media does what it likes to do and devolve the conversation to a political state, whereby liking or disliking the show was akin to making some kind of political statement about yourself. Though whatever that statement is, I'm not quite sure. And Amazon certainly put every effort into ensuring this narrative would prevail. Aside from owning IMDb, they deleted thousands of negative reviews of the show, funded hit-piece mainstream media articles against fans, tried buying off independent media such as YouTube creators, and encouraged activism both in support of the show and against critics. They then projected their own behaviour by claiming it was the critics that coordinated a review bombing against the show, and the showrunners themselves even labelled fans as fascist-adjacent admirers. It's no wonder Tolkien fans were being called racist. The finger had clearly been pointed in the direction the money paid it to, and this is why so much of the media is already compromised. If they want to keep their exclusive access and connections, they must do what Hollywood tells them to. And in this case, it's to praise everything representative of the right political cause, regardless of whether the thing they're supposed to be critiquing is actually good or bad. This renders much of corporate media's so-called opinions a redundant source of anything not totally skewed with bias. But what if this can be forced down the throats of viewers too? Well, this would lead you to believe that millions of Tolkien fans had been outed as racists, and really the implication that a politically correct and diverse show should be praised on this basis alone and be immune to critique. What this means for viewers is if they don't want to be seen as a racist and all the negative connotations that go with it, they'll be forced to act out of fear, capitulate, and jump to the defense of Amazon. This widens the goalpost infinitely, and it's merely a matter of whether or not you're shooting in the right direction. All things that would come between Amazon, Hollywood, and their payday are now demonized. If you have an opinion that goes against corporate agenda, you will be dubbed a racist and ostracized. Rule by love or by fear. Either you'll love what you're given or you'll be scared not to. And that's great for business. It's both lucrative and low risk. We're certainly all too familiar with Hollywood and its love for remakes. What else would justify the billion-dollar cost of the show unless it was a sure thing? Because in the corporate world, money like this isn't thrown around without good reason. And that's why, if Amazon can successfully propagandize this large investment, it will be a billion-dollar domino to fall, creating a cascade across all TV and movies, setting a precedent for things to come. Hollywood will love that because they can bank easy, low-risk money by using cookie-cutter formulas and representing whatever social political views are hottest at the time. This has nothing to do with thinking in terms of viewer enjoyment, but instead conditioning viewers into assuring returns on a financial investment. And of course, it will mean every viewer losing, because all valid metrics are out the window. Having any kind of taste will be demonized by the media, and you should be left to consume what you're given. Sounds a little extreme, but this has long been since established by a man who said it better than I. He was a friend of Tolkien, and like Tolkien, was a lover of mythology, languages, and stories. His name is one you might be familiar with, C.S. Lewis, and in his novel, The World's Last Night, wrote, "In the highest ascetic circles, one now hears nothing about the artist's duty to us. It's all about our duty to him. He owes us nothing. We owe him recognition, even though he has never paid the slightest attention to our tastes, interests, or habits. If we don't give it to him, our name is mud. In this shop, the customer is always wrong." 60 years ago, Timeless words, as relevant today as they have ever been. So why is the Rings of Power so rife with allegory, and why has all discussion around it turned political? At its heart, there is a massive conflict of interest. Tolkien created for the love of creative expression. Amazon are looking to make money by any means necessary. In the case of Rings of Power, they thought they could shortchange viewers by making a PR campaign, calling it a TV show, and saying it has something to do with Tolkien. But at its core, this could not be any further removed from Tolkien. Misrepresenting the creative works of others to intentionally push your own message is the worst thing you can do to tarnish their legacy. This was never about paying homage to Tolkien, but weaponizing it into propaganda. This has nothing to do with the celebration of great fiction, but twisting it as a means to serve a political agenda. This wasn't written with heart, but with cunning, and certainly no shortage of deceit and animosity towards Tolkien fans. Because the Tolkien fans would always be the ones putting up most resistance to the narrative. They decided to make an enemy of them when the show was in pre-production. And as viewers, this serves as an important reason as to why we should drink from a source of purity instead of such tainted waters. Sure, we all love to be blown away with expensive CGI and cinematography. We can sit in awe of an epic battle scene. But stories have existed far before the use of CGI, before TV, and before they even had a written form. Because for many of us, we seek something in these stories. Some truth, meaning, some mystery intertwined throughout the journey to be unraveled with an end payoff. But no such thing will be found here. There's no story really to tell. There's no grain of wisdom, no underlying values. It's just a PR attempt to extend the political battlefield and laps up all the attention that comes with the polarity. But what if you agree with the messages and think using TV shows for activism is good? There are many out there who don't care for Tolkien and don't even watch the show but will like it because of the message. Much of the cast and crew are coincidentally or not coincidentally activists who could not care less about the original material, and they see it as a chance for a payday and a stage to express their personal views. A rather bitter pill to swallow for Tolkien fans, but comes as no surprise given the rife narcissism in Hollywood. Answers can be found by delving into another famous pop culture event this year, in which a public trial took place between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Heard's allegations against Depp reduced his reputation to tatters. He lost millions in movie contracts and was ostracized from Hollywood and labelled a perpetrator of domestic abuse and dubbed, in his own words, a wife beater. The media support came out in waves in favour of Amber Heard, heralding her a brave figure standing up for women and driving the name of Johnny Depp into the ground further. To support Heard was to support domestic abuse victims. To support Depp was to support perpetrators, even though there hadn't been a verdict. To not believe her was to be a slight against women as a whole. As the trial progressed, it became clearer this narrative was false. Amber Heard made false allegations against Johnny Depp as a means to get money and garner sympathy and attention by victimizing herself and riding a popular social political cause. As much as the media would try and damn Johnny Depp, the public support and trial verdict was so significant that they had to do a 180. Though there were still those that would insist her innocence. Heard was an activist and became a symbol for domestic violence victims and victims as a whole. But really it was outward beauty to hide an ugly inner truth. Had it worked, it would have been a great PR campaign for her. She would be heralded by the media a hero, a symbol of feminism, and the media certainly wanted her story to be true. The reality of Heard was quite different. In her deposition, she actually had contempt for victims of domestic abuse, regarding them as a doormat too weak to stand on her own 2 feet. She knew nothing of the hardships and trauma that domestic violence victims go through. What happened was a step back for women. Less real women who are victims of domestic abuse will be believed, because they may be likened to Heard and their very real accusations called into question. Really, she was just proof that if you scream something loud enough from the rooftop, soon enough people will start believing and forming an echo chamber. In the same vein, Amazon and the media have been screaming racism too, drawing attention away from the very real racism that goes on in the world. All said and done, the point is, clearly there is much to gain and very much to lose as a consequence of riding social political movements. Amazon want to be a symbol of diversity and female empowerment and lead you to believe they are ending racism. Let's see what really happened here. By being in a video, Amazon have a means by which to develop a face, identity, and set of values. These values will be whatever makes the most money while adjusting for risk. And this answers the questions. Why would Amazon hire writers with hardly any experience? Why isn't Galadriel calm, wise, and measured like Cate Blanchett's Galadriel from Lord of the Rings, but on the contrary, angry and stubborn? Why is she unrelatable, unrealistic, unapplicable? Because she herself is allegorical. Because really, she's the attractive figurehead for corporate social politics. Her anger is to be felt secondhand by the audience to stir them into activism supporting the show and going after critics. And they certainly made a demon of those critics. Galadriel's journey will be something of a fallacy, whereby through her rage and self-righteousness, she will unite the peoples of Middle-earth. And we've seen this work already, as she did nothing but insult the Númenóreans, yet still managed to unite them and inspire devotion in them to join a cause against an elusive enemy. With that force, she will form the last alliance and lead a battle against an evil who will be likened to the wrong political views today. There was no story to write, but there were orders to follow. So much for female empowerment, they're just pawns in a game. And now we return to the message of Ismael Cruz Cordova. What was dear to his heart was not just representing his heritage, but being a symbol of inspiration for disenfranchised, silenced people as a whole. His story was one of significance, but as it was, didn't quite fit the social political movement Amazon were going for. It was duly stripped of every ounce of sincerity it had, reducing it to a soulless piece of propaganda in order to fill corporate agenda and deflect legitimate criticism, and so they could use him as a symbol of allegory for racism in the past and present of the world today. There was never any standing up for minorities, but attempts to dehumanize and misrepresent them, and reduce them to a skin color alone, by devolving all conversation to only that. There was never any empowering of black people or women. On the contrary, they are slaves to social politics and corporate greed. That's why you will see very, very little in the way of actual praise towards the actors, because it's almost as if they never had a role to play at all, as first and foremost, they are marketing tools as opposed to actual actors. Their names will be tainted with controversy. They'll be seen as social political symbols. Once this show has run its course, they'll be thrown out by Hollywood, and their careers will suffer. Also, Amazon could cheap their way into praise and shortchange viewers, not just by taking nostalgia trips and recycling previous storylines, but by riding the coattails of identity politics too. And they were determined to racialize the conversation every step of the way. Just 5 days after the first episode aired, Amazon's PR team released a statement on social media, reading, "We, the cast of Rings of Power, stand together in absolute solidarity against the relentless racism, threats, harassment, and abuse some of our classmates of color are being subject to on a daily basis. We refuse to ignore it or tolerate it. J.R.R. Tolkien created a world which, by definition, is multicultural, a world in which free peoples from different races and cultures join together in fellowship to defeat the forces of evil. Rings of Power reflects that. Our world has never been all white, fantasy has never been all white, Middle Earth is not all white, BIPOC belong in Middle Earth and they are here to stay. Finally, all our love and fellowship go out to the fans supporting us, especially fans of colour who are themselves being attacked simply for existing in this fandom. We see you, your bravery and your endless creativity, your cosplays, fan cams, fan art, and insights make this community a richer place and remind us of our purpose. You are valid, you are loved, and you belong. You are an integral part of the Lord of the Rings family. Thanks for having our backs." On that same day, they were ready with t-shirts and logos donned by 3 original trilogy cast members, complete with the slogan, "You are all welcome here," and hashtags to promote the show. And this post alone was a massive hit on Twitter. On the part of Elijah Wood, he's more than happy to help make the post in the name of such a good cause. How else would they so willingly promote the show unless it was under the pretense of something as significant as fighting racism, and thereby creating the narrative that by watching and liking the show and promoting it online, you are somehow ending racism. And now Amazon and Galadriel have given the audience a cause to fight for. But in essence, this post is a display of the exact same narrative as before, whereby it's a chance to talk about diversity and, like before, use people of colour as tools at every opportunity. After all, how many shows and movies have we seen in the past featuring a cast of various different skin complexions? When did they ever feel the need to make such statements? This statement states that Tolkien's world was being gatekept by white people. But when was this ever the case in the past? When did you ever see a single article about this before Rings of Power hit the screens? They would have the nerve to say, "You are all welcome here," yet poison the show with the most exclusionary, divisive, and polarizing topic of them all, politics, in an attempt to turn fans against each other. They made relentless attempts to silence all those who would disagree with them, and intentionally antagonize Tolkien fans, leaving them with a choice of either like the show or be dubbed a racist. They play the game of social identity politics and try to draw out sympathy when it backfires so the audience will support the show. No, we're not all welcome here. You're only welcome here if you're willing to shill for Amazon for their TV show and repeat the same senseless rhetoric on how Amazon and the show is some beacon of social justice and moral authority. That's the real cause Galadriel is fighting for. That's why Amazon took every measure to antagonize fans. Because this was all an attempt to draw out racism, so that Amazon themselves can be seen as a victim of discrimination, and like Amber Heard, be the noble hero standing against these evils. It's rather fitting that Sauron used deceit and false promises to manipulate people into unwittingly bringing about their own demise, as it seems Amazon are all too familiar with that part of the story. In the same vein, this show gives the promise of ending racism, standing for female empowerment, and any number of political ideals. But what does all this incessant talk of skin colour really achieve? To answer that, I shall call upon a wise man.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man.
This was Morgan Freeman talking about putting an end to race consciousness. Stop attaching colour labels to people. Stop the racialization of society. But that never fit into Amazon's agenda, just like Tolkien's views didn't either. If all you talk about is the colour of skin, that itself is discriminatory. It divides people into categories, and when people feel divided by labels, they turn against each other. And that is exactly what happens here. Because we are left in a situation where both Tolkien fans feel offended and people of colour feel offended too. That division creates attention, and that attention makes money. And that's why the media turn everything into a matter of politics. Because nothing is as divisive as politics. The more all conversation is politicised, the more divided we are. Just look at America. Because it's divide and conquer, not unite and conquer. No. We were never all welcome here. But the truth is, this really does make you feel sorry for minorities. They didn't just misrepresent and tarnish the legacy of Tolkien, they made a mockery of women and used those of colour as pawns and a means to instigate hatred. Because by doing so, it lends credence to their movement and gives people a reason to rally in defence of the show out of sympathy. Without it, how could they release these statements and get the PR that came with it? And that's a really heart-wrenching truth about what it means to play this game of social identity politics in TV. And Amazon are a business that saw money in that. In the same notion, how do we get rid of this show that was made with the most insincere of intentions? Stop talking about it. Then they will fail here, and we will take away the financial incentive they have to cheat viewers by playing games in bad faith. In short, why is it that I'm against this show? When this show was made, they're putting out a little bit of hate into the world, and that's something the world doesn't need. And all this time, they would want to be hailed as a hero. Despite the attempts of Amazon to represent all critics as scum, we knew that was never true, as much as they tried to wish it into existence. So I want to end by turning conversation away from one so divisive. Their claims of hate will be silenced with love to our fellow humans shown every day, and we will continue to show, regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation. Whether it be our family, friends, or loved ones who are always there, or as simple as smiling at a cashier or bus driver, listening to new music, TV, or movies, trying food from a new culture, learning a new language, having an interest in the lives of others, and sharing harmony and connecting over the great many things that unite us. Whether it be standing up for real injustice on the streets if we saw it, or simply having a favourite movie character or idol in general who happens to be of a different colour, culture, sexual orientation, or gender to ours. They wanted us to forget that which brought us so close together and all that we had in common, so they could rebrand us racists and divide us, so they could extend the political battlefield and carve out their own territory. We owe it to each other to collectively see that they should fail. For most of us, there was never a bone of racial hatred or discrimination in our bodies, and as much as Amazon and the corrupt media would wish it, never will be. Thank you for your time spent watching this video.